Usually, when you buy a ticket to see live music, there's this very comforting, almost unspoken contract involved. You walk into a room, you face forward, and there's an elevated stage.
Right. The performers stay in their designated zone.
Exactly. They pick up their standard instruments, and they deliver a structured song with a recognizable melody and a steady beat. You observe, you applaud, and you go home. It's neat, it's safe, and, well, it's heavily curated.
Yeah, I mean, that boundary between the creator and the consumer is kind of the defining characteristic of modern entertainment. You are basically paying to witness a polished, finished product from a very safe distance.
But in 1995, a San Francisco experimental collective called Rubber O Cement took that entire contract, set it on fire, and essentially forced you, the audience, inside the instrument itself.
They really did. It was completely radical.
So today, we are taking a deep dive into a really fascinating column from Monumental Movement Records, or MMR, to unpack the underground structure of San Francisco experimental music. The mission here is to figure out how this group actively rejected the very definition of a band.
Which is a lot harder to do than it sounds.
Definitely. We're going to explore how they completely obliterated the lines between music, pure noise, and performance art. And what their wildly chaotic DIY philosophy reveals about the hyper-curated digital lives that you and I lead today.
To really grasp what Rubber O Cement achieved, we have to start by completely discarding our conventional vocabulary for music. The MMR column makes this incredibly clear.
Right.
We are stepping away from commercial polish and entering a space of unadulterated expression. You cannot approach their work looking for a song or work in the traditional sense.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because before we can even visualize what it's like to stand in the room with them, we need to understand what they actually are, structurally. The source material refers to them not as a band, but as a variable project.
Yeah, a framework.
Right, a framework. What does that actually mean for the people making the sound?
Well, a traditional band creates and rehearses a specific piece of art, right? A song. And they do that so they can replicate it flawlessly night after night. Their goal is the reproduction of a product.
Sure.
But Rubber O Cement's goal was to generate situations. They were building an environment, a set of conditions where sound simply occurs. Because of this, their membership was incredibly fluid.
Which is totally different from a normal band.
Exactly. It was rooted in the 1970s San Francisco art collective culture, which entirely rejected the idea of the lone genius standing on a pedestal. Instead, you have this rotating, constantly shifting community of creators entering and exiting the project.
That makes me think of a very specific analogy. I don't look at Rubber O Cement as a rock band at all. I look at them more like an open source software platform.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, like it's this unconstrained, almost feral environment where different artists and performers can just plug in their own code.
Right.
Whether that code is audio noise, physical movement, or visual art.
Right.
And because there's no central director dictating the final output, it creates this spontaneous, totally unpredictable outcome every single time.
What's fascinating here is how that open source structure completely changed their function within the city's culture. By stripping away fixed members and abandoning traditional musical rules, they became a crucial nexus point.
Like a bridge.
Exactly. They were the bridge connecting the gritty, aggressive, underground music scene with the highly conceptual fine art gallery scene. Musicians, sculptors, and performance artists could all just collide under this single variable framework.
I'm kind of hung up on the logistics of that, though. If you have this incredibly fluid project with rotating members, no rules, no set songs, and random people just plugging in their code, how on earth does it not instantly collapse into unlistenable garbage?
That is a million-dollar question.
Right, like if there's no rhythm or shared key to hold it together, how does a situation maintain any artistic integrity?
Well, even jazz is too safe a comparison for what they were doing. People hear improvisation and they automatically picture a jazz quartet. But in jazz, even when the saxophonist goes completely off the rails for a 5-minute solo, there is a massive safety net.
The rhythm section.
Exactly. The bass player and the drummer are holding down a shared rhythmic grid and a shared tonality. Rubber O Cement stripped away the net, the tightrope, and the tent. They abandoned the concept of a musical key entirely.
Wow.
Yeah, so to prevent that from devolving into total collapse, you need a different kind of gravity. For Rubber O Cement, that gravity came from two specific individuals, Grux and Mick Goldwater.
These two are the absolute core. They are the stabilizing axis for the entire solar system. and they operate in completely opposite, almost conflicting ways.
Very much so.
Let's look at Grux first, because the MMR column paints a visceral, deeply unsettling picture of this guy. He is the visual and physical force of the collective. But he's not just standing there at a microphone stand.
No, not at all.
He wears these bizarre, physically deformed masks and sprawling, chaotic structures strapped to his body.
He treats his instruments not as separate tools held in his hands, but as literal extensions of his anatomy.
That concept of visual noise is wild to me. The act of playing the music isn't just about the acoustic sound wave hitting your eardrum. It's about the physical impact of watching it move.
It's intensely physical.
Right. If you picture a performer dragging a heavy metallic apparatus across a concrete floor while wearing a mutated mask, the visual struggle and the screech of the metal are one and the same. He turns his mere presence in the room into a chaotic visual event.
Then you look at the other side of the axis, Mick Goldwater. If Grux is the towering physical manifestation of visual noise, Mick is the invisible architect of the sound itself.
The guy behind the curtain.
Sort of, yeah. Mick's focus is entirely on electronics, process signals, and feedback. But he isn't playing riffs or chord progressions. He is designing what the column calls sound states.
Okay, I need to stop you there to clarify the mechanics of this. When we say process signals and feedback, what exactly is he doing? How do you compose a sound state without notes?
To understand Mick's approach, imagine holding a live microphone too close to a monitor speaker.
Oh, I hate that sound.
Right, you immediately get that horrible, piercing shriek that makes everyone cover their ears. That's an acoustic feedback loop. Mick was essentially taking that raw, volatile mistake, capturing it, breaking it apart using custom electronics, and using it as his primary medium.
That is insane.
He is sculpting the atmospheric pressure of the room using raw electronic signals instead of musical notes.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, but also a little confusing. If Grux is essentially a walking, breathing, visual art piece covered in deformed structures, and Mick is over in the corner deliberately triggering electronic feedback loops to manipulate the air pressure, is this even a concert? Or are we just talking about avant-garde theater that happens to be agonizingly loud?
This raises an important question about the boundaries of art, which is exactly what they were trying to shatter. In the context of Rubber O Cement, Grux's visual noise and Mick's acoustic structure cannot be separated.
They're a package deal.
Yeah, you can't untangle the bizarre visual of the mask from the screech of the electronic feedback. They merge into a single, unified phenomenon that hits the audience's brain simultaneously. And crucially, the MMR piece notes that they are not a performer and an accompanist.
Right, so Mick isn't just playing the backing track to Grux's performance art.
Precisely. They are two equal forces, controlling the environment from completely different angles. One exerts force over the physical, visual space, and the other exerts force over the acoustic, invisible space. They are manipulating the room itself.
Which means the actual room they are playing in has to be incredibly specific. If you are unleashing massive, unified sensory phenomena that weaponize feedback and visual noise, you can't exactly book a gig at a local sports bar on a Friday night.
Definitely not.
You need a container that can actually hold that energy.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the unique geography of San Francisco in the 1990s.
Right. San Francisco wasn't just a backdrop for this collective. The city's architecture functioned as an instrument. The city has a deeply ingrained history of embracing fringe expressions, obviously dating back to the 1960s counterculture.
Oh, well, for sure.
But by the time Rubber Cement formed in 1995, the landscape had shifted into a boom of noise, industrial music, and harsh performance art. This wasn't happening in institutional venues with velvet ropes and soundboards. It was happening in warehouses, abandoned buildings, and independent art spaces.
The MMR column refers to these locations as the architectural gaps of the city. I love that imagery so much.
It's a great phrase.
Yeah, it wasn't about finding a stage. It was about finding an empty void in the urban decay and filling it with sound. And because they were playing in these unconventional gaps, spatiality became everything.
Totally.
They weren't plugging into a standard club PA system. The actual placement of the speakers in the room, the way a high-frequency screech bounces off a cold concrete wall versus a wooden floor, the physical movement of the sound around the bodies in the space, that was the composition.
This completely redefines the act of making music. For Rubber O Cement, music isn't performed. It is arranged or placed. When you drop a frequency into a three-dimensional space, you are observing how it interacts with the physical world.
And think about how that completely changes your role as a listener. When the music is physically placed around you, bouncing off the damp walls of a basement, you aren't just a passive consumer standing in the dark watching a brightly lit stage. You are swallowed up by the event.
You're in it.
Yes. The audience is made part of the space. You are standing inside the instrument while it is being played.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the physical environment actively dictated the evolution of the art. This hyperspatial, immersive type of music simply could not have existed without the physical decay and the available urban gaps of San Francisco at that time.
There's a perfect storm.
Exactly. The architecture gave them the freedom to remove the traditional stage, which completely dissolved the barrier between the creator and the witness.
But operating in an abandoned warehouse or an empty city gap comes with a massive set of logistical nightmares. You don't have pristine commercial studio gear. You don't have an acoustic engineer making sure the mix sounds balanced.
You're basically on your own.
Right. So if you want to control the environment under those conditions, you have to invent your own tools from scratch.
This is where their profound DIY ethos comes into play. They weren't just bringing standard guitars and amps into these warehouses. They actively modified their own equipment. They built entirely unique production environments out of scavenged parts, raw circuitry, and custom electronics.
And it's vital to clarify that this wasn't just anti-commercial punk rock posturing. They weren't using cheap gear just to stick it to the corporate music industry.
No, not at all.
It was a deeply technical, almost scientific quest to control the parameters of sound. Because standard commercial equipment is strictly designed to produce standard commercial sounds. A synthesizer is built to sound like a synthesizer.
All right.
If your goal is to make a sound that has never been heard by human ears before, you have to rip the machine apart and rewire its brain.
In that rebuilt, rewired environment, all acoustic hierarchy disappears. They treated every sound equally. The screech of a custom short-circuiting electronic board held the exact same musical value as a piece of magnetic tape, or a heavy metal object being struck against the floor, or even just the ambient environmental noise of the warehouse itself. It is the ultimate democratization of sound.
I am endlessly fascinated by the logistics of documenting this. If their entire identity is based on this unrepeatable physical chaos in a specific architectural gap, how on earth do you put that on a cassette tape or a CD? Attempting to record this feels almost like a betrayal of their core philosophy.
Well, the source notes that their recording process was almost entirely live, with absolutely minimal editing. They didn't isolate tracks in a soundproof studio, recording the drums on Monday and overdubbing the noise on Tuesday. The recordings they released were merely documents of a specific event.
Because the core value of their art is its irreversibility, its one-time nature.
Exactly.
Even if Crux and Mick dragged the exact same modified equipment into the exact same warehouse on a different night, the performance could never yield the same result. The humidity in the air, the number of bodies in the room absorbing the sound waves, the random fluctuations of the analog circuits as they heated up, all of those variables guaranteed that the situation could only ever happen once.
Editing that recording in a studio to make it sound cleaner or more palatable would fundamentally destroy the truth of what happened in that room.
It makes me think of trying to record a massive thunderstorm. You can set up a microphone and capture the audio of the thunder, but a clean, edited audio file doesn't capture the sudden, terrifying drop in air pressure.
Right, you lose the atmosphere.
Yeah. It doesn't capture the smell of ozone or the visceral way the boom physically rattles your ribcage and shakes the floorboards. Editing the recording in a studio to make it sound better strips away all the danger and the reality of the storm.
That's a great analogy.
The raw, unrepeatable violence of the event is the art. The fact that it happened exactly that way for one split second and will never happen again in the history of the universe, that's where the value lies.
That is the perfect way to contextualize it. This practice establishes a value system that is entirely distinct from commercial success. The commercial music industry relies entirely on repeatability. The entire economic model is based on a hit single sounding exactly the same on the radio, on your phone, and in a massive stadium.
It has to be predictable.
Exactly. Rubber Rose Cement completely rejected the concept of repeatability, and this refusal to be neatly packaged and commodified is exactly what gives the underground scene its lasting endurance. You cannot buy, sell, or mass-produce a volatile, one-time situation.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We spend so much of our lives optimizing absolutely everything. We filter our photos, we edit our text messages before we send them, we endlessly curate our digital profiles to create this perfect, repeatable loop. Hearing about the philosophy of rubber o cement makes you realize how utterly exhausted we all are by our own constant curation.
The contrast is jarring. We live in a highly edited digital reality where everything is infinitely reproducible. You can copy and paste an image or a sound file a billion times and it never degrades. In that context, Rubber Cement's approach feels deeply, urgently relevant.
It really does.
They remind us that physical, spatial expressions, events that happen in a real room with real bodies, moving real air with sound waves, possess a weight and a consequence that the digital world completely lacks. You simply cannot replicate the tension of a live, unpredictable room on a flat screen.
And frankly, even the way they organize their collective feels weirdly prophetic when you look at how we work today.
Oh, absolutely. Their fluid, variable membership perfectly mirrors modern project-based collaboration. We no longer spend 40 years at one company in a rigid structure.
Right.
We are constantly dropping into different teams, contributing our specific piece of the puzzle, and then moving on to the next framework. They were pioneering that kind of decentralized, open-source collaboration with avant-garde noise decades ago.
It's true. We're all essentially trying to generate situations in our own lives now, navigating fluid networks rather than sticking to one rigid script forever.
Which is ultimately the enduring legacy of this collective. In an age where we have an endless supply of undo buttons and delete keys, they celebrated the irreversible. They proved that there is immense, undeniable value in an unrepeatable moment.
And that leaves us with a fascinating thought to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive. We spend a massive portion of our energy trying to perfect things. We want to erase the mistakes, smooth out the rough edges, and optimize for the absolute perfect, frictionless result.
We all do it.
But what would actually happen if we just stopped editing? What if, instead of trying to force every single moment of our lives into a neat, clean, predictable melody, we actually embrace the raw, chaotic, irreversible noise of the moment? Maybe the true masterpiece isn't the perfectly polished final product. Maybe the masterpiece is the beautiful, unedited chaos of the situation itself. Just like tearing up that pristine concert ticket and stepping into the dark, unpredictable gap of a warehouse. You never truly know what you might hear until you let the noise wash over you.